She nursed the blind werewolf back to life for 40 nights, unaware he belonged to the Alpha King. The man was not dead. That was the first problem. Nora had pulled 3 dead men out of the mud behind the borderland checkpoint in the last 2 months. She knew what dead looked like. Dead was quiet and it stayed where you put it. Dead did not grab your wrist with a hand that felt like iron and drag itself upward with the last desperate strength of something that refused to stop being alive. She yanked her wrist back. His hand dropped into the mud. She stood over him in the rain, her lantern cutting a small yellow circle in the dark, and she looked at what she had found. He was enormous, even folded sideways into the ground the way he was. Big through the shoulders, long in the leg, the kind of large that was not accidental but built over years of particular use. His clothes were military, but she could not read the rank. The badges had been torn away, every single one, cleanly, not in a rush, but with deliberate and purposeful hands. No identification code. No tag. No name anywhere on his body that she could find in the 30 seconds she crouched over him while rain came down the back of her collar. His eyes were open. Both of them were ruined. The left one was swollen shut, split at the outer corner, bleeding slowly into the mud below his cheekbone. The right one was open wide. She passed her lantern across it twice, close enough to feel the heat of the flame on her own wrist. Not a flicker. Blind, then. Or close enough to it that the difference did not matter tonight. His breathing was wrong. She could hear it even over the rain, a wet and labored dragging sound in his chest that meant the ribs on his left side had been damaged badly enough to affect what was beneath them. He had 2 open wounds on his back. She found them when she turned him slightly, one shallow across the shoulder, and one deep enough that the rain was washing a thin pink river off the edge of him and into the mud in a constant quiet stream. She had a rule about the badly wounded. She had made it during her first year at the clinic, when she was still trying to save everyone and learning, at great cost, that the trying itself could destroy you if you did not manage the terms of it. The rule was simple. If they can still make a decision, let them make it first. She crouched down with her knees in the mud and her lantern held steady. "I am going to pick you up," she said, loud enough to carry over the rain. "I am going to take you inside. You can say no and I will leave you here." She waited 3-4 seconds. He said nothing. She picked him up. He was heavier than he looked, which was already considerable. She had the kind of strength that comes from 9 years of practical demanding work, not from any gift, and she used all of it. She got his arm over her shoulder and his weight against her side and she half-dragged, half-walked him across the 40 meters of mud and wet grass between the field and her back door, and every step was a separate argument with the ground. She got him inside. She got him onto the low examination table. She put the lantern on the hook above him and stepped back and looked at what she had brought in from the rain. Up close and in the light, he was worse than she had thought. The shoulder wound was not the main problem. The deep wound on his back, below the left shoulder blade, was already infected. She could see it clearly, the skin around the edges a deep and angry red, tight and hot when she pressed the backs of her fingers against it. The infection had at minimum a full day's head start, probably 2. His fever was already running high. She could feel it just from her hand against the side of his neck. His lips were dry and cracked and his collar beneath the mud and the blood was wrong, that particular grayish undertone that meant the body had been running on reserves for longer than it should have had to. She worked. She had done this enough times that her hands knew the steps before her mind did. She cleaned the wounds, the shoulder first, then the back, using the boiled water she kept stored in the brown bottles on the second shelf. She packed the deep wound with the herb-treated cloth she prepared herself, the kind that pulled the heat out of an infection if you applied it early enough and kept replacing it through the night. She wrapped his ribs, running her hands along each one carefully, feeling for the break and for the bend, for the ones that had moved and the ones that had only bruised. 2 broken, 1 bent. She strapped them clean and firm. She put a cold compress against his swollen left eye and left the right one alone entirely, because the right one was a problem for another time when there was something useful she could do about it. When she reached for the water bottle to irrigate the deeper wound, his hand moved. He grabbed her wrist. Not with the frantic wild grip of a man who did not know where he was. With the deliberate grip of a man asking a question before he was capable of speaking one. She did not pull back immediately. She waited a moment. "I am not going to hurt you," she said, clear and even. "You are already hurt worse than I could manage. I am trying to correct that." His grip loosened. His arm went back down. She continued. By the time she finished, the rain had stopped. The window above the table showed the particular dark purple that the sky wore for 40 minutes before the dawn came. She sat in the chair she had pulled close to the table, her back aching in two specific places that told her she had been walking bent over for too long, and the man on the table was still alive. His breathing was still not right. But it was less wrong than it had been, which was improvement, and improvement was what she worked with. She did not sleep. She never slept through the first night with the ones who were genuinely close to the edge. She had a theory, built on 9 years of evidence, that the first night was when a person decided, somewhere below the level of consciousness, whether to stay or to go. She did not know if this was medically accurate. She knew that it was true. She had sat with 11 people through their worst first nights, and 8 of them had made it through, and she could still put a precise face to each of the 3 who had not. She was not sentimental about this. She was honest about it, which is a different thing entirely. She sat in the chair and watched him breathe and thought, as she thought about every patient on the first night, about what she could observe from the outside. Clinically. Without attachment. His age was somewhere in the range between 35 and 45. There were deep lines at the corners of his eyes and silver mixed into the dark of his hair at the temples. His face, when it was not contracted with pain, had a severity to it that she believed had been there long before tonight, an inherent set to the jaw and the brow that spoke of long-established habit and long-exercised authority. She catalogued this the way she catalogued everything else. Medically. Without allowing it to mean anything. What she catalogued last, and what she could not quite file away cleanly, was his hands. They lay still on the table where she had positioned them. She studied them in the low lamplight. She had developed a habit of noticing hands, the way other people notice faces, because hands told you more about how a person had spent their life than almost anything else. These hands had calluses in a pattern she had not seen before on any of the soldiers and workers who came through the clinic. They had old training scars on the knuckles, the deliberate kind rather than the accidental. There was a mark on the inside of the right wrist, faded enough to be years old, shaped like something she could not make out in the low light. She stopped leaning closer. It was not her business. She had taken him in. She would do what she could with what was in front of her. That was the whole arrangement. She would not make it more complicated by getting curious about the things he had clearly gone to careful lengths to conceal. She went to her small kitchen and put the kettle on because she needed something warm to do with her hands while she waited for the dawn. She stood at the window and looked out at the post-rain dark, at the road that had gone completely still, at the border marker barely visible 50 meters down from the clinic door. She had not called her colleagues. Both of them were available by knock if she needed them. She had not knocked. Some instinct she did not bother to analyze had said no, and she had listened to it, the same way she had listened to it when she noticed the stripped badges and kept her face completely still. She drank her tea. She went back and sat with him and watched the dark outside the window turn slowly light. He was still alive when the morning arrived. His fever climbed in the last hour before dawn, as fevers always did, and she worked to bring it down with cold cloths and the bitter medicine from the third drawer of the supply cabinet. He was not conscious through any of this. He had not been conscious since he grabbed her wrist. But his hold on being alive had not loosened or shifted. She named him Wolf on that first morning. She had not meant to name him at all. She needed something to put at the top of his chart, something to call him internally when she thought about his treatment. The sounds he had been making in his fever sleep had been following her around the room since before dawn. They were not the ordinary sounds of a sick man. They were low and continuous, almost a growl, the sound of something in serious pain that had been trained, over a long time, not to make the sounds that pain usually produced. Something that refused to be heard suffering. She wrote Wolf at the top of the chart in her small careful letters. She felt nothing particular about having done it. On the second day he tried to get off the table. She put one flat hand on his chest and said no, simply and without force, and he stopped. He was stronger than her, or he would be once he recovered, and they both understood this without any discussion. He had chosen to stop because she had said to stop. The choosing was the part that mattered. She pulled his blanket back up to his shoulder and went back to her chart notes and did not look at his face again until she had to. The third day he opened his eyes. The left one was still under the compress. The right one opened slowly, the lid heavy and controlled, the movement deliberate rather than accidental. He did not look at the ceiling. He turned his head toward the window where the grey flat morning light was coming in from the east, and she watched his face from across the room. He was trying to see. She could see him trying, that focused internal effort of someone testing a thing they are afraid to test, feeling out the limits of it before committing to a result. His right eye tracked toward the window and stopped. And his expression did not change. Not a flinch. Not a sound. Not the particular collapse she had seen in patients receiving serious news for the first time. He already knew what the right eye was and was not going to do. She was certain of it. She could not have explained the certainty. She simply had it. The infected wound is responding, she said. The ribs are properly wrapped. Your fever broke this morning. You have been here 3 days. He was quiet. Then, from low in his throat, rough and unused, you found me. Behind the checkpoint. In the field. Alone. Yes. A pause. You carried me. Yes. Something shifted in his face. Not gratitude exactly. Something more considered than gratitude, like a man adjusting an internal understanding of how the world worked, revising an assumption he had held for a long time. Water, he said. She brought it. She helped him with the first 2 cups, holding the cup, tilting it, watching his throat move. On the third cup his hand came up and took it from her. The grip was unsteady but it was deliberate, and she let him have it without comment. He drank 3 full cups. He did not ask for more. She made a note on his chart. Over the following days the clinic organized itself around him the way small spaces organize around something new that has weight and presence. Not by plan. By repetition. She came in the early mornings. She changed the dressings. She checked the fever and the breathing and the rate of healing, and she asked the questions that needed medical answers. He gave them accurately, without embellishment. He began to eat, carefully at first, then more. He slept in irregular stretches, and when he was awake he was completely still, and he listened. He listened the way almost no one she had ever worked with listened. Not waiting for his turn. Actually receiving what was in the room, building from it. She could feel him cataloging the sounds of the clinic, the patients 2 rooms over, the 2 staff members arriving in the morning, their footsteps on the stone floor, their voices. The road outside. The birds. The quality of silence between the rain and the next rain. He was mapping the building around him from sound alone and doing it with a thoroughness she associated with people who had been trained specifically to do it, not people who had learned it out of simple necessity. On the 6th day, while she was changing the dressing on the deep wound, he said, without inflection, "You have been doing this work a long time." 9 years, she said. Alone, for the difficult ones. She paused for just a moment, then continued with the dressing. Yes. Why? He said. She did not answer. Not because the question was unwelcome. Because she did not have an answer that was short enough to be useful, and she did not want to give him a long one. He did not press. Several minutes later he said, "What do you call me?" She had not planned to tell him. "Wolf," she said. He was quiet. Something shifted in his expression, not quite a smile but the precursor of one, the expression that would become a smile if it decided to. "Why?" "The sounds you make when your fever is bad." He considered this. He seemed to find it reasonable. "You have not asked my name," he said. "You have not offered it." "No." That told me something. He turned his head toward her, locating her by sound the way she now understood he had been doing since the first day. The compress still covered his left eye. The right one could perceive light and shape at close range and nothing more. "What did it tell you?" he said. "That asking would create a problem," she said. "And that whatever the problem was, it belonged to your life rather than to mine." Something moved in his face again, the not quite smile in the same neighborhood it had been before. He did not offer his name. She did not ask for it. He had partial sight in the left eye by the 17th day. Not clear. Shapes and edges, light and movement, enough to navigate. She watched it return in real time, the moment his left eye, freed from its final dressing, found her face and actually found it with definition. He went still. She was 2 feet away. He looked at her with that partial, effortful sight and said nothing. She said nothing. She finished what she was doing and stepped back and gave him the window, because she had already understood that he was memorizing everything his working eye could provide before it became unreliable again. She understood that completely. She left him to it without comment. After that he watched her. She felt the shift, the specific quality of being observed by someone whose observation was not casual or social. He looked at her the way she looked at patients, systematically, gathering information. She had been observed before without it affecting her. What was different this time, and what she found quietly irritating, was that she wanted to know what he was concluding. She was not going to ask. On the 20th night the rain returned and she stayed late at the clinic rather than walk home through it. She sat at her desk with her record books and the lamp turned low and he was awake, she knew by his breathing, and neither of them spoke for a long stretch of time. The lamp burned. The rain came down. The quiet between them was not uncomfortable, which she noted without examining. Then he said, not loudly, "You lost someone specific in the war. Someone who made you particular about the night shifts." She set her pen down. She looked at him. He was looking at the ceiling. He was saying it to the air. She could answer or not answer as she chose. "My brother," she said. 3 years ago. He bled out because there was no one who stayed through the night with him. Wolf was quiet for a moment. "I am sorry," he said. Not performed. A fact, delivered with weight. "It is why I do not leave the difficult ones alone through the first night," she said. "It is why I do not explain it. You just explained it to me." "Yes," she said. She was not entirely sure why. "I did." She picked up her pen. He said nothing further. The rain came down outside and the lamp burned low and neither of them moved, and she walked, and he lay still, and the night passed around them. On the 22nd day 4 men came to the front door of the clinic. They were not police. They wore plain clothes that did not sit naturally on them, a size or 2 off from convincing. The man at the front was polite with the fluency of someone who had practiced the politeness until it no longer showed. "We are looking for someone," he said. A large man. Dark hair. Severe injuries. Nora stood in the doorway. "I have several patients," she said. "This one would be difficult to miss. Very significant injuries. I maintain patient privacy," she said. "If you have a legal instrument compelling disclosure, I would need to review it." The man studied her face. He was looking for the crack in it. He did not find one. "He is not in any trouble," he said. "We simply want to locate him for his safety. If I encounter anyone matching that description who wants to make contact," she said, "I will tell them you came." She closed the door. She stood with her back against it and counted to 10, then walked to Wolf's room without hurrying. He was sitting upright. He had heard every word. "Men looking for you," she said. "I know. Not police. No. Trained to look ordinary. They are very good at it," he said. She stood in the middle of the room and looked at him. "I am not going to ask who you are," she said. "I have not asked in 22 days and I am not starting now. But I need to know one thing." He waited. "Will my clinic be put in danger? The people inside it?" Something moved behind his walking eye. careful and honest simultaneously. Not from anything I do, he said. I cannot speak for what others may do. It was not a reassurance. It was a precise answer from a man who did not offer imprecise ones. She found that she trusted the precision more than reassurance would have given her. All right, she said. She turned to leave. Nora, he said. She stopped. Thank you, he said. And it had weight, that word, the specific weight of something used rarely by someone who did not give it cheaply. She did not turn around. Get some rest, she said, and walked down the hallway and out into the evening air and stood there until the weight of his voice stopped doing what it was doing. The days continued. He moved around the room now, carefully, finding the walls and the furniture and the spacing between things. His left eye gave him enough to navigate, but he used it cautiously, the way you use something you know may not be reliable tomorrow. He was precise about where things went. The cup on the right side of the table. The book she had left by his bed and not examined her reasons for leaving. His coat, which she had cleaned and hung on the hook by the door, waiting for the day he would need it again. She watched him learn the room and she thought, with increasing unease, about the quality of the learning. The way he knew instinctively how many steps between the table and the window. The way he tracked the movement of people outside the room by their footsteps before they appeared in the doorway. A particular kind of training. A particular kind of life. She found this under the growing category of things she was not going to pursue and went back to her work. By the 30th day the deep wound was fully closed. The ribs had healed clean. His breathing was clear and easy and the sound of it was ordinary now, no longer the labored thing she had heard in the mud on the first night. She had come to realize, over the last 2 weeks, that she had catalogued his breathing the way people catalogue the sounds of their own house, without noticing she had done it, noticing only when something changed. The left eye was stable, perhaps 60% of its full function, reliable within its limits, something he had adapted to with the speed of someone accustomed to working with whatever tools were available. The right eye had not changed. She had told him plainly that it would need a specialist, equipment she did not have, a city physician with instruments she could not provide. He had nodded. One single nod. No other response. She had stood with that for a moment and then moved on, because moving on was what the work required. He had begun helping her without being asked. The high shelf. Moving a supply crate she was wrestling with. Steadying the table when one of the legs wobbled during a complicated dressing change. Small things, practical things. Each one done without announcement, as if he were simply completing the logical next step in what was already happening. She said thank you each time. He said nothing each time. But the not quite smile lived in the corner of his expression more frequently now, and she knew what it meant, and she did not say so. On the 30th night they talked for 2 hours after the lamp had been turned down to its lowest setting. About the border and the way the war had rearranged the land. About the town she had grown up in before she came to work the checkpoint clinic. About the quality of silence after a storm, how it was different from silence that had never had anything in it. He asked questions that were genuinely curious and carefully restrained from being intrusive, and she answered slowly, pulling things out of places she did not usually visit. She walked home afterward and stood in her kitchen without making tea and thought about the crowded category without a label and about what happened to a careful person when a thing arrived that did not fit into any of the carefully built categories. She thought about it for a long time. Then she went to bed and decided she would think about it again in the morning, when she had slept, and the morning would not cooperate because she did not sleep much, and when she got up she was no less certain about what she knew and no more certain about what to do with it. She went to work. On the 31st day she found the coat. She had been looking for the backup bandage roll she kept in the deep storage cabinet on the left wall, the one she had not sorted since the cold months when all her attention went to the medicine stock. She had looked in the regular cabinet and in her travel bag and in the box under the examination table, and in none of those places had the bandage roll appeared, which left the deep cabinet, the one she had been meaning to sort for 6 weeks. She opened it. She went through the upper shelf. She found the bandage roll behind 2 jars of dried herb and a box of old receipts. She also found, on the lower shelf, folded clean and pressed, the coat she had washed in the first week and put away for the day it would be needed again. She had checked his coat the night she found him. She had gone through every pocket, every lining, looking for any identification he was not going to provide voluntarily. She had found nothing. But she had been walking in the dark and the rain with blood on her hands and a man on the edge of dying on her table. She had not been looking slowly. She looked slowly now. The inner lining had been restitched. She could feel it when she ran her fingers along the seam, the slight difference in the thread, the place where the fabric had been opened and carefully closed again. Not sloppy. Done by someone who knew what they were doing and wanted it to stay hidden unless someone specifically looked. She took out her seam knife. She opened the repair with 3 careful cuts. She reached inside. The seal was flat and heavy in her palm. The metal was cold even through her warm fingers. She stood in the storage room and looked at it for a long time. She had worked the border clinic for 9 years. She knew seals. She knew the regional governor's seal and the Army Corps seal and the trading authority seal and the seals of 3 different ministries. She knew what she was looking at when she was looking at one. She also knew this particular seal the way she knew her own name. The way everyone in the territory knew it. The way children learned to recognize it before they learned to read, because it appeared on every official document that had ever mattered in their lives. The seal of the Alpha King. Not a lord. Not a general. Not a minister or a commander or a regional authority. The king himself. She stood in the storage room holding it and she thought, with a clarity that surprised her given how loud the inside of her chest had become, of course. Of course the badges had been stripped clean and left in the mud. Of course the men at the door had worn ordinary clothes and asked politely and gone away when she said no. Of course he had answered not from my actions and meant it with precision. Of course he had listened to everything and said nothing and been, for 31 days, the most honest person she had ever not asked a question of. She heard him cross the floor in the other room. She heard him stop in the doorway of the storage room. She turned. She held up the seal where he could see it. He could see shapes at this distance. She watched him see it. He went completely still in the way he was still when something required his full attention. She waited. "Is this yours?" she said. "Yes," he said. "Tell me why you were in the mud behind the checkpoint." He was quiet for a moment. "I was being moved from a location under circumstances that certain people did not want to succeed." "Someone tried to kill you?" "Yes." "They stripped your rank and left you in the field?" "Yes." "And the people looking for you, the ones who came to the door, they are yours?" "Yes." "They did not know you were here?" "No. They were searching in general. I did not call for them." "Why?" He was looking in her direction with his partial working eye. "Because when you are not certain that being found is the same as being safe," he said, "you are very careful about who finds you." She looked at the seal in her hand for a long moment. Then she put it on the cabinet shelf. "Come and sit down," she said. "I need to check your left eye in this afternoon light." He had not expected that. She watched the almost surprise move through his face and then resolve itself into something that was not quite relief but was in the same direction. She walked past him and got her instrument and pulled the chair to the window and he followed her and sat, and she examined his eye with the same focus she had used every time, because the eye was still her patient and deserved the same attention regardless of what she had just discovered. The pupil response was better. She wrote it on his chart. When she stepped back she put her instruments down and looked at him. "Why did you not tell me?" she said. "When you are dying in the mud," he said, "you do not know which truths are safe." "And after? When you were well enough to know who I was?" A long pause. He looked at the window. Then back at her. "After," he said, "you were the first place I had not been required to be anything specific in a long time. I did not know how to explain it without ending it." She turned this over carefully. She held it up and looked at all the sides of it and found that it was honest. Not a convenient honest. An honest, the kind that had a cost. "You could have left," she said. "Once you could walk." Yes. Why didn't you? He was quiet for a moment. His voice, when he spoke, was low and even. Because I did not want to, he said. That is the only reason there is. She looked at him for a long time. I need to think, she said. Yes, he said. She walked to the door. Nora, he said. She stopped. What I said about not wanting to leave, he said. That is a fact about me. It is separate from the other fact, the seal, what I am to the world outside this room. I am not asking you to resolve them together. I am not asking you to do anything with either of them. She stood at the door with her hand on the frame. I know, she said. She went outside. She stood in the cold evening air and she held the whole weight of 31 days and tried to look at it honestly, the way she looked at everything she was not sure how to handle. She stood there until she was cold through. She thought about what it meant to protect someone without knowing who they were. She thought about what it meant to find out. She thought about the specific grief of a man whose position had cost him every ordinary thing, and the specific grief of a woman who had organized her life around other people's survival because it was cleaner than wanting her own. She thought for a long time. Then she went back inside. She did not close the door behind her. They talked until nearly midnight. She was angry first, and the anger was real and he did not try to move her away from it. She said, for 30 days I used everything I had to protect someone who could, once he was on his feet, have protected this clinic and the people in it far more effectively than I ever could have managed. He said, yes. She said, that is not enough. He said, I know. I am not asking you to find it enough. They sat in the silence of that for a while. Then she said, with the anger spent and something more complicated in its place, and yet. You chose to be ordinary here. For 30 days you were not what you are. You were a man in a room and nothing else. He had looked at her. His left eye was steady in the lamplight. Yes, he said. I had forgotten what that was like. What it cost and what it gave back. I did not want to lose it by explaining it away. She understood that completely. She did not say so. But he knew. She went home that night and lay in the dark for a long time and let herself think without the professional categories and without the rules and without the careful distance. She let herself think about what she knew and what she wanted and what the difference between those two things was, and whether the difference mattered as much as she had spent 9 years believing it did. The men came on the 40th morning. Not the careful ones in the plain clothes. These were different. 12 riders in the full official colors, the deep blue and silver she recognized from every significant document that had passed through the clinic with the most important seals on it. The horses stopped in a perfect line in front of the clinic and the morning air went still around them, the way air went still around something that had real consequence. Nora was already at the door. She had been awake since before the gray part of dawn. Something had woken her, some awareness that had been building since the 32nd night, some internal accounting of days that knew this was the number and this was the morning. She had dressed in the dark and walked to the clinic where the road was still empty and the light was still cold and flat. She had put the kettle on and stood at the window with her tea and watched the road, and they had come while the cup was still warm in her hands. The man who dismounted first was gray-haired and deliberate in all his movements. He took off his riding gloves with unhurried precision and came to the door with the manner of someone who had spent a very long time entering rooms that belonged to other people. "We are here for him," he said. "He knows you are coming," Nora said. "He has been told." The man looked at her for a moment longer than was necessary. Then he stepped through the door she had made available. She had told Wolf the previous night. Simply. She had said, "I believe they are coming in the morning." He had been quiet for a moment and then said, "I know." She had asked if he was ready. He had said, "I have been ready since the 32nd night. I was not leaving." She had not answered that and he had not asked her to. They had sat together while the night moved through its hours and talked about the small and the large and the things that did not fit into either category, and when she finally left it was close to midnight and the stars had come out clear and cold and she had walked home without hurrying. What had happened in the 8 nights between the seal and this morning was not reducible to a summary. It was the accumulation of two people who had spent 31 days keeping the most important things on the careful side of a line, and then crossing the line, and discovering that the territory on the other side was larger and more worth inhabiting than either of them had been willing to say until the 31st night forced the honesty. On the 32nd night he had told her about the siege. Not as a story but as a precise accounting of what had been at stake and what had been lost, the way she delivered the worst medical news, plainly and completely and without softening the edges. She had listened with her full attention, and when he was done she had told him about the clinic's first year. The cases she had lost. The specific arithmetic of staying, which patients stayed and which did not, and what it actually did to a person to perform that arithmetic every single night for 9 consecutive years. She had not told anyone the arithmetic before. On the 34th night she had been genuinely, completely angry at him and had said exactly what she meant by it, that she had spent 30 days protecting someone who had, from the moment he could stand upright, the power to protect himself and her clinic and everyone in it far more comprehensively than she could ever have managed with her 2 hands and her small supply cabinet and her willingness to close the front door on men who asked the wrong questions. He had not defended himself or explained or minimized. He had said, yes. She had said, that is not sufficient. He had said, I know. I am not asking you to find it sufficient. They had sat in the silence of that together. Then, after a long while, she had said, and yet. You let yourself be ordinary here. For 30 days you were not a king. You were a man in a room with a name I gave you. You let that be real. His eye had been steady in the lamplight. Yes, he had said. I had forgotten what ordinary cost and what it gave back. I did not want to lose it the moment I named it. She had understood that in a way she could not have explained to someone who had not spent 9 years reducing themselves down to their function. On the 36th night she had answered questions about her life before the clinic. Specific questions, not broad ones. The town she had grown up in. What the river behind her house had smelled like after the spring floods. What she had wanted before she learned to want only things she could accomplish with her own hands. He had listened with the same total attention he gave everything, and somewhere in the middle of an answer she had felt, clearly and without confusion, that she was being held by someone who was not going to let what she gave him fall. On the 38th night he had said, quietly, that he would not be careless with what she had given him. He had not listed what she had given him. She had not asked him to. She had stood still and let the statement exist as exactly what it was. She had said, I know you won't. On the 39th night they had not spoken very much at all. They had been in the same room while the last night moved through its hours and the lamp burned, and the quiet was the quiet of two people who had already said what was necessary and were letting it settle into something that would last beyond this room. Now the grey-haired man was in the doorway of Wolf's room, and Wolf was standing in the center of it, fully dressed, his repaired coat on, and he looked nothing at all like the man she had dragged out of the mud on a rainy night 40 days ago. He looked exactly like what he was. She could see it with perfect clarity now, the thing she had been filing away in the unknown category since the first night, the way the room reorganized itself around him without his asking it to, the way even 12 of his own riders had gone still and attentive the moment he had walked through the clinic door. He looked like a king. The grey-haired man spoke to him in a low formal voice, a report, an accounting of the weeks. Wolf listened. He did not look at Nora while he listened. She understood why. She had watched him do this for 40 days, he finished one thing fully before beginning the next. He gave a short reply. The grey-haired man nodded and stepped back into the hallway. Wolf turned and looked at her. His left eye was clear and steady in the morning light. His right eye was still and quiet. He stood in the light from the window she had left uncovered, the window he had always turned toward to feel the direction of the morning. He did not ask her to come with him. She had spent a considerable amount of time on the 37th night being honest with herself about why this was not what it looked like and also exactly what it was. He was a man who did not ask for what he was uncertain of receiving. This was not coldness. This was the specific honesty of someone who had watched what assumptions cost people over a long time and had decided never to trade in them. She had decided, by the end of that night, that she understood him completely on that point. That his not asking was not the absence of wanting. That she knew the difference between those two things and that the difference was everything. He said, "The upper left cabinet. Third shelf." She looked at him. "I left something there," he said. "For when you restock it." She held his gaze. His passion and his stiller were both directed at her with the same quality of attention he had given this room for 40 days, complete and present and unhurried. Then he walked past her, down the hallway, and through the door of the clinic, and she heard the sound of the horses, and the sound of 12 riders moving away, and then the particular silence of a morning that has had something very large move through it and leave. She stood in the room. She counted to 10. She counted past 20. She counted past 30. She walked to the upper left cabinet. She opened the third shelf. A small piece of paper, folded twice. She opened it. Inside, in handwriting that was precise and deliberate and looked exactly like him in every way she could have articulated and a few she could not, a name. His real name. The one that had not been offered in 40 nights. Below the name was an address. Not a palace. Not any official location. A house in the old district of the city, 3 hours east, in the part of it that still looked the way it had looked before the war had rearranged everything. Below the address, one line. "When you are ready." Not if. When. She read it twice. She folded it back along its original creases, the precise ones he had made. She held it in her palm for a long moment and she stood at the open cabinet and she looked at the ordinary shelves and the ordinary bottles and the ordinary small instruments of her ordinary life, and she thought about 9 years of being useful, about the rules she had made for herself, about the night shifts and the arithmetic of staying. She thought about what it meant to want something without a safety net under the wanting. She put the paper inside the inner pocket of her coat, the one she wore when she walked home, the one closest. She went to her desk. She wrote the final chart entry for Wolf. Discharged. Recovered. She wrote it in her small and careful handwriting and her hand did not shake because she did not let it. She closed the chart. She fired it. She handed the day to her morning staff without explanation. She put her coat on. She stepped outside into the cold morning air. She went home first, because she was a practical person about transitions. She watered the plants she had neglected for 2 weeks. She ate because the body required it regardless of what the rest of her was occupied with. She packed a small bag, not a large one. 3 days' worth. She had learned long ago not to carry more than you could manage with one hand free. She stood at her window and looked at the road east and she let herself feel what she felt, all of it, without the professional categories and without the rules and without the distance she had maintained for 9 years as a survival strategy. It felt like nothing she had a word for. It felt like standing at the edge of something with empty hands. It felt like the first honest thing she had chosen for herself in a very long time, chosen not from duty or usefulness or the old habit of staying when other people left, but from wanting. Plain and clear and entirely her own. She picked up her bag. She locked the door behind her. She turned east. She did not look back at the clinic. She did not make plans beyond the first 3 hours. She walked toward the name on the paper in her inner pocket with the same certainty she had carried across 40 meters of mud on a rainy night when she picked a ruined man up off the ground and brought him inside. She had not known, that night, what she was carrying. She knew now. She walked.